Jack Lynch.
Hi there, everyone. It's good to be here. Well, I thought I'd tell a story from Eamon Kelly tonight. And Eamon Kelly, he was the master. You know, when I was a young fella listening to the radio, he was my first introduction to a great storyteller. And for me and lots of people older than me, I think Eamon summed up what a storyteller could be. He told from the old tradition. He was born in 1914. And then as a young man, he became apprenticed to his father, who was a carpenter and a wheelwright. He went on to teach woodwork in Kerry. And then with a great interest in amateur theatre, himself and his wife-to-be, Maura, they took to the stage. They both appeared in the great John Millington Synge's Playboy of the Western World. They made their way to Dublin and they joined the RTE Radio Rep Company. So they were radio actors. And in fact, I see Nuala there. It was Nuala's father, Micheál O'Hay, who was the head of drama and variety on radio at the time. And he discovered Eamon in the sense that he realized what a great storyteller Eamon was, on top of being a great actor. So that's how Eamon got to be a regular on the radio and all that. And he became a great stage actor, television actor, movie actor, and all the rest of it. Now, in 2001, myself and Pat Spate, we shared the bill with Eamon down at the Court McSharry Storytelling Carnival. And Eamon wasn't well at the time. But when he got on stage, the sparkle was back. And he coaxed all of the audience into the palm of his hand. And when he got us there, he tickled us under the chin. About 5 short weeks after that, we got the sad news that Eamon had passed on to his reward. And I have very fond memories of the day of his funeral and an indelible memory that I'm going to share it with you. He was buried in Fingal Cemetery, which is in North County Dublin, just beside Coolock, where himself and Maria had made their home. In fact, they lived on a road called Tonlegee Road. And you may know that Tonlegee is an anglicisation of Tonlegee, which means arse to the wind. And Eamon was always delighted that that's where he was living. Anyway, we're in the graveyard there, several hundred people. And the priest, who was a family friend, he started to say, now you'll notice how we have said a decade of the rosary before lowering the coffin into the grave. And that's not the usual sequence of events. But now Eamon's son Owen here is going to complete a ritual that he saw his father doing. We're all straining our necks to see what Eamon's son Owen was up to. And the priest continued with his commentary. He said, now, as you can see, Owen there is loosening the screws on the lid of the coffin of his father. And seemingly, says the priest, Owen had seen his father Eamon do this on another occasion at the funeral of an old family member. He'd asked his father afterwards what that was about, and Eamon says, it's an old Kelly family tradition. We loosen the screws on the top of the coffin, and that means come Judgment Day, us Kellys will have a head start on all the other buggers. So, as you can imagine, there was a wave of laughter throughout the graveyard. And that's a very sweet sound to hear in a graveyard. Anyway, the story I want to tell from Eamon, it's a short wee story. And it's about 2 poets, 2 Kerry poets from where he was from. And if you know anything about the County Kerry, the place is coming down with poets. In fact, you couldn't swing a cat, but you'd clip the ear of a poet. And that wouldn't be a good thing to do because they can be Ikey Divils poets. I know a lot of poets. So Kerry, for hundreds of years, is famous for poets. But as Eamon said, there were these 2 poets, and they had a routine. Every winter, they'd come into Kenmare, to the winter fair in Kenmare, and they'd buy themselves 2 cows for the tub. And that would keep them going for the rest of the winter. And part of the routine they had was when they had bought 2 cows that they fancied, they'd drive the cows up the main street of the town and stop them outside a pub. And then they would tie up the cows, leather cords around the cows' horns, tie them up to a lamppost. It'd be like what you see the cowboys doing, tying up their horses outside the saloon in Deadwood or Dodge City or somewhere like that. The poets then would go into the pub and they'd spend the rest of the day there and most of the night. And they'd be drinking away goodo, and they'd be singing and carousing and making up poems, all sorts of poems, poems full of insults for the locals who were sitting around them in the pub. The locals kept out of this. And they'd also be composing eulogies for each other and saying how fine they were as poets and all that. And another thing too, they'd be whistling dirty tunes, if you know what I mean. So the locals are looking at them there, and it gets very late in the night, and the poets finally leave the bar. And when they come outside, it's freezing. Now, they're not cold at all because they're well fortified with all the drink they've been having. But the two cows tied up to the lamppost outside, these cows were shivering. And as soon as they untangled the leather straps on the cows' horns, off went the cows galloping down the main street to get the blood circulation going again. Well, one year they did the usual thing and everything happened. They got two cows. They found two fine black cows, totally black. They were in, they were drinking, they were up to the usual business. The people were looking askance at them. They were insulting the people in iambic pentameter. They went out of the pub that night, and when they unleashed the cows, it was so cold, the cows galloped off once more out of the town to get the circulation going. Well, the two poets went after them, but because it was such a dark night, and because these were two black cows, and because it was a quarter moon, and even at that, the quarter moon was swaddled by a big dark cloud, they couldn't see a splink. They couldn't see their finger in front of their faces. So they're searching for these cows. They cut themselves to ash plants, and anytime they heard a sound, they'd be swinging around with the ash plants. And because they couldn't see anything, it was more often than not, they were lashing away at each other. Well, they went up borings and into fields, but finally, as dawn broke, they were driving two animals in front of them. But wait till you hear this, they weren't their own cows. Two rangy bullocks, these fellas were, belonging to some farmer up in the Routy Valley. So they had to bring the cows back into the town and return them to their rightful owner. And then by the time they'd gone around all the schools and asked the kids to put out on the public telephone or whatever, tell people that their cows had strayed and all that. And by the time they found the proper cows, the two black cows, they decided, well, they weren't going to get up to that carry on the next year, making fools of themselves with such an adventure. Well, the next year came around, and once more the two poets turned up at the winter fair in Kenmare, and they bought themselves two cows they were very happy with, and brought the cows down the town, tied them up to the lamppost, went into the bar. Well, the locals were a bit surprised to see them and wondering, well, are they going to start drinking now? Are they going to make fools of themselves like they did last year? So the poets were once more singing songs and composing panegyrics and sonnets and poems full of insult and poems full of eulogy for each other, and once more whistling dirty tunes. Well, the local people said, we're not going to interfere with them because they're Ike devils, let them at it. Well, now, the two poets, they had an inkling they were being talked about, and one of the poets stood up and began to sing a song that he was extemporizing. And the song went something like this: we don't care a tronin about darkness. Now, a tronin is a little wisp of straw, a worthless thing. We don't give a tronin about darkness, be it blacker than nature allows. We preferred ourselves this time, me buckos, and purchased two handsome white cows. It snowed that night. That's my story.